there's three main portions of a tire. Your tread, that has steel belts. You've got your sidewall that has basically small amounts of steel belts and rubber belts that runs the side. And you got your bead on both sides. That's the big thing that's got to be done first. You got to be able to break that bead. That's where the machine comes in. Before we break the bead, we want to make sure we get the wheel weight off. Wheel weight tool. Has a notch in it that locks into the top side of the wheel weight, and a flat part that locks in the bottom of the wheel weight. Now, when you're dismounting and mounting tires, it's very important to know the valve stem. This has tire pressure monitors, so you never want to break a bead right here. You'll break the sensor off. Always break a bead with tire pressure sensors here, 180 out. Some applications have the internal tire pressure monitors, which is a lot of the Fords, the Ford Flexes and things like that. They're 180 out, but they're on the inside. They're a band style. So keep that in mind. If you're not sure if you have a tire pressure sensor on the inside, break 90 degrees from the valve stem. So we know this has tire pressure sensors. That's right here through the valve stem. So we're going to start the initial breaking the bead 180 out. Now the machine puts a lot of pressure to break this bead. Now this bead has a very thick rubber and about 15 different steel bands on the inside. So it's very difficult to break loose by hand. That's where the machine comes in. It's separated pretty easy, but I can see it's still tight here, so I'm going to turn 90 degrees and break loose here. That way I'm not worried about that bead catching the sensor. And she's broke loose. Now on the other side we want to do the same thing. Take the wheel weight off where the tip goes into the notch, and it comes right off. Now again, this is going to be a lot harder to do on the back side because there's actually a lip, which we can show you right here. There's a lip here that allows, when you break the front side, to sit in this groove. When you're dealing with the back side, there is no lip. So it's a lot tighter to get that back bead to come loose all the way around. So it's going to take a lot of extra work to get that back side bead broke loose. So again, make sure you're 180 out from the valve stem. Rotate a little bit. Because I've been doing this long enough, I know what my machine's capable of doing. Right now I'm just shy of 90 degrees out from the valve stem. Rotate it back. Do the same process again. You can actually see how much pressure it's taking to get this. I'm not going to stick my finger in there because it'll come off. But you see how much pressure it takes to to get that bead to break loose. So it's not quite broke all the way loose, it's still a little tight down here. Rotate a little more. So you tap on it a little bit, get a little bit more. This machine is capable of doing 22-inch wheels, the size of the wheel. We do have the adapters to go to a 24, and I believe it'll do a 26. We don't go that big because a low profile needs a cage to when you inflate to seat the bead, but we'll explain that later. Basically what's going to happen is these arms are going to come out so you can lock on the inside of the wheel or the outside of the wheel where the bead would normally go. The only reason you want to go on the inside is when you're dealing with the extra large wheels, where this lip right here is actually on the back side of the wheel. So that is very important to know, is where your lip is. Luckily this one's on the top side, so we're going to bring the clamps all the way in. Set it in place. So now we're locking on the inside of the wheel. So let's dismount this tire. So it's important to note valve stem location. We're going to rotate the valve stem. We're going to bring the head over. It's called a duck head. This one's steel. We got plastic inserts to protect the wheel. So we're going to bring this down, lock it against it, and the machine's actually going to lift up just a touch to protect if these stuck out closer to the lip. So now we're going to bring the valve stem in a little bit closer, so when we get our tool in there, we don't run the risk of, when this comes up, of pushing pressure against the bead and breaking that valve stem. So we got a tire tool, and get in here where that little lip is, get a little pressure on the outside of the tire. And now we're going to let the machine, what's happening is the bead is actually on the top side of the duck head. So when we rotate, because of the pressures, it's going to allow the tire to come off. So now we're going to fight a little bit because of the way these tires are to get this lip up. Alright, so now we're going to rotate it back to reseat the duck head. Grab the tool, being careful of the tire sensor. Work it back and forth. And off comes the tire. Alright, when I move this around, this tire pressure sensor happens to be an 11 millimeter. Some applications it varies. Just going to take the nut loose. Now this one does have a kind of like a crush washer. That's used. That's the tire pressure monitor. It varies from vehicle to vehicle, manufacturer to manufacturer. So basically what happens is there's a rubber O-ring here that sits into the valve stem hole, and then your washer goes over top, and the nut, and that's how it is secured and stops air from leaking out from the valve stem tire pressure monitor. The other thing is the inside the valve stem, which Mike discussed earlier. So that's the primary tire pressure monitors. I will note on some of the newer styles they use a Torx bit that actually secures a rubber style valve stem in place. This is the new valve stem we're going to be putting in. We're going to go ahead and upgrade to the rubber. One, they're more reliable. Like I said, generally on some GM applications and some of the newer applications, where that little gold dot is down there, that's where the Torx bit would go. So what we're going to do is take the valve stem portion of the sensor off. I'm going to put just a little bit of lube on it. This is just standard tire lube. Just a little bit of lube to help it go back into the hole a little bit easier. This is a valve stem tool specifically designed and made for valve stems. So what we're going to do is take the cover off, slide the new valve stem in, use a tool which is threaded for that. We're going to thread this in place. Now, to prevent damage to the wheel, I'm going to use a wood tool. This is also used to do tire repairs. I'm going to place it here, put a little bit of pressure, and seat that valve stem into place. Now we're going to take the new sensor, come on around, and this has marks here and here, and we're just going to line that up, do a little nudge, and that's all there is to that. So the valve stem and tire pressure monitor has been installed.
Good deal. How do we know about programming? Any programming numbers we need to pull off those or anything?
We can actually pull them off of the old tire pressure monitor, which every manufacturer is different. We use Autel tire pressure monitor calibration tools, and we'll actually pull the internal number of what Toyota says and actually take this sensor and duplicate the numbers for the vehicle to this new sensor. So we're basically going to copy all the information from this to the new sensor. So that way when we get it on the vehicle, customer drives on this particular vehicle above 15 miles an hour and below 30 miles an hour for 3 minutes, it will automatically recalibrate. The newer GM applications, once the tool sensor is programmed, it is instantaneous. A lot of the vehicle manufacturers went that route, so it's constantly telling how much pressure's in all the time. So that's how we're going to do that. Is we're actually going to use the Autel tire pressure monitor tool to reprogram the new sensor to duplicate the original sensor. That the new sensors are going to use a special cap, and the reason why is so that the technicians know that this does have a tire sensor in there, compared to an old style valve stem, which does not have an extra lip there. So that way it tells the technician exactly that this is a tire pressure monitor, so they know not to break the bead at this location. So there is a difference in the size of the caps. So that is a big difference, and that's how they determine. The original valve stem on that style, because it has a cap or a nut on it, uses a gray valve stem cover, cap, whatever you'd like to call it. So those are the three different styles besides your aftermarket chromes and things like that. But this just signifies that this is a tire pressure monitor with a rubber valve stem. That is a metal valve stem tire pressure monitor, and that is your traditional valve stem cap. So we're going to put this back on so we don't lose it. Let's see. These don't have any dots. Okay. All right, so now we got the tire up. You can actually see how thick that bead is. And that's a bunch of steel bands wrapped in rubber. And that is actually the primary structure of your tire. This is one of the three major portions of the tire. On the inside, they do have a smooth texture on the inside intentionally. Some people like to use what they call dyna beads or beads. Some people use water, so they don't have weights on the outside. It's basically an internal balance of a tire. We don't do that. We prefer doing a traditional balancing with weights on the wheel itself. That way you don't have any issues. If the tire gets heated up, you get moisture on the inside. Now those dyna beads or whatever beads they want to use inside, regular brass BBs, they won't clump together when they get moisture, because the tire is going to heat up, one with road conditions and with the brakes.
How do you tell which side's outside and inside?
A lot of tire manufacturers vary. They will have a logo somewhere that says this side out, or they will actually have a directional with an arrow on it if you're running directional tires. If that was the case, you want to make sure you're getting the right wheel with the right arrow pointed the correct way. So, for example, if this tire was directional and the arrow is pointing down, we want to mount this tire like such, so it goes on a driver's side. That way that arrow is continuously going around, so when you put it on the vehicle, you're on the driver's side, and that tread design, because of the arrows, has a specific way that the water moves through the grooves. This application, you don't have to worry about it. On some applications, I can pull a different tire. There's going to be two dots, a red dot and a yellow dot in different locations. And what that is the red dot you want to line up with the valve stem. That way you get the most accurate and least amount of weight possible for that particular tire. When you're balancing tires, it does not balance the wheel. It actually balances the rubber on the tire. You see a lot of vehicles that don't have a correct alignment, and they get a chop where the tires kind of dip in and out. It's going to require a whole lot more weight to compensate for that to get a correct balance, because that has excess rubber taken off because of an improper alignment. So this does not have any dots, so that means Michelin says this can be mounted in any direction, any location. So it's not specific for a valve stem. So what we're going to do now is get a little bit of tire lube that's safe for the rubber. Get it all the way around this bead.
Can you get that?
What we're going to do is, one, move where the valve stem is far enough away when we set this in. You can actually come around here and we'll kind of see a little bit more. So what's going to happen is this thing actually has another groove right here that when we rotate this way, it takes this bead and forces it down into this groove. So we're going to let the machine do the work. And I want to notice that the valve stem is right there at the corner, so it's not going to hit the valve stem when it gets over here where the most pressure is on that inner side of the wheel. There we go. Now we're going to rotate so that way this valve stem is far enough away that when we put pressure over here, get over top of that lip, that we're not going to run the risk of catching that valve stem. A little bit of pressure all the way around, and that's the primary part. That machine allows that rubber to go into that groove that we had right there in the middle of the wheel. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take the cap off, grab our valve stem tool, and take the valve stem out. That way when we put air to this valve stem, we have the maximum amount of pressure possible to allow it to seat these beads back into the rim. So we're going to apply some air. This one aired up pretty nice. So what's going to happen now is the more and more air you get in here, it's going to force that bead to come up, and it's going to pop because it's so much tension on there that it's basically seating the bead. And the reason you want that there is, there's the bottom, so that way you know that the tire one's not going to leak down. And because that is, there's the other, that way, that is because your majority of the weight of the vehicle is actually riding on those two steel, on the bead, on those steel belts on the inside. So that is very crucial to make sure those beads seat properly. Some take high pressure, which you require a cage. Your run flats, like your Corvettes, your Porsches, so a lot of your exotics, they run the run flat tires. And when you're seating the bead on those, you're going to exceed 100 psi. That's a lot of pressure. And what can happen is because it's so much pressure and so much force to seat that bead, because it's so thick on the sidewall, that it actually can explode. And when that happens, there's a lot of bad things that occur when that happens. So they actually have a steel cage with thick bars in there that they set it in there and allow the bead to seat inside that cage. So if it does explode, basically, the shrapnel won't go everywhere. So luckily on these, most passenger cars, light truck tires, your 8-ply, 10-ply, your heavy-duty tires, you don't have to worry too much. Your lower profiles will require higher pressure to seat that bead. We do not recommend, as a technician, to ever exceed 55 psi when seating a bead. And the reason why is these tires on your traditional vehicles, your smaller average daily drivers, non-sports cars, your light-duty trucks, when you get that kind of pressure above 60, you run the risk of, when that seats, of creating basically catastrophic failure of the tire and create serious injury. So do not exceed more than 50 to 60 psi. My machine will stop at 50 psi to prevent that from happening. So the machine's smart enough to know, hey, you know, we don't want to go over 60 psi or 50 psi from my machine. So just keep that in mind. It takes a lot of pressure to build that up. Right now, this happened to seat at 20 psi. So we're going to take it up to the manufacturer's
29.
Recommended.
29 for the fronts.
For 29 for the front.
So you can go up to 30 actually. 29 for the front, 32 for the rear. So what I'm doing now is the tire pressure recommendation is 29.
I got it up to about 32, and the reason why is when I take this air hose off, I'm going to lose air because I got to put the valve stem in. So I take it a little bit above. That way when I put the valve stem in, I'm at 29 psi. You said you wanted at 30?
Well, 29 for the front, 32 for the rears.
Okay, so we're going to leave it right there. We're going to put the cap back on. Now when we release the locks that hold the wheel in place, it's going to jump up because there's still a lot of pressure down here. It popped up just a little bit. So now this tire is ready to balance. And before we balance this tire, you want to get this center cap out. A lot of times it's just a pressure fitting. Sometimes they're held in by screws, but these are pressure style fittings. All right, we have an old school tire balancer. I personally think it's fantastic for standard balancing of tires. We don't have any max sticky weights on the inside. At one time it did, you can see right there. So right now we're going to measure the cone. We're going to make sure we get the right size cone. That one won't work. So we're going to go to the next step up. That fits in there nicely, so we have a nice round surface, nice surface to fit on. Now the way this vehicle is designed, we're going to check to see if our cushion will fit in here properly. So that way we can actually use the spring weight back here so it sits inside the groove because this is at an angle. So we want to make sure that the inside of this sits in here nice and neat. Some applications you can't use these, which means you're forced to put that ring or your sleeve on the outside. This one, I'm not going to use this. And the reason why is there's just not enough room to make sure that stays centered. So we're going to take this and basically mount it in the machine like such. Big nut. We're going to take our wheel weight tool, just lock it in place. That way when this thing starts spinning, we know it's nice and secure. Okay, while the machine warms up, there's a couple of measurements we need to know. For starters, we're going to measure right here, and basically what this is telling the machine how high this wheel is and what the offset is compared to the center line. So right now we're at 164 offset. So we're going to take our machine and tell it's 164. Now we need to know how wide it is, so we're going to take a measuring tool, measure the width, and we're actually at 7, just shy of 7.5, so we're going to call it a 7.5. And this does go all the way up to 10-inch wide, and it's got the half mark, so we know this is going to be a 7.5 wide. So you can see that.
Got it. All right, so that's 164 millimeters, 7.5-inch wide tires, 164 offset.
The offset is basically where the center line or where the hub attaches on the inside of the tire.
Okay.
So we're basically measuring from where the hub sits flush against the rotor to the outside of the rim. the machine required, they call it an offset in this machine manual. Different machines call it different things, but the offset is where my machine sets where it would attach to the rotor to the outside of the wheel. So the machine's calibrated for that. So it's 164, 165. So we know it's a 7.5 inch wide, and these are 16 inch tires, 16 inch wheels. So we're going to change this to 16 and make sure we don't have any more wheel weights. Double check, because it will throw the balance off. So we're going to give it a little spin, put the hood down so the machine can run, and right now the wheel is turning at speed, and right now it is requiring 0 weight on the inside of the wheel.
But it's requiring quarter.
1 1/4.
1 1/4, okay.
1 1/4 on the outside, right at the very top of the wheel. So we're going to put a 1 1/4 ounce wheel weight.
And that sticker won't throw it off?
No.
Okay.
There's not enough weight in the sticker to throw it off.
Fine. I can have it.
So,
Got it.
we're going to take the wheel weight at the highest point, set it in, use the tool, and basically those lips lock it on the inside. So we got, it's wide enough to sit nice and neatly in that wheel. Each vehicle is going to vary from application what wheel weight you need. Now if your vehicle requires magnet or
Sticky weights. Sticky weights.
Yeah, if it requires sticky weights, because you don't have that lip, you'd actually tell the machine, or you would do the same thing, but add a quarter weight on the inside of the spoke right in here. So, but because this has a lip, we're not going to add any sticky weights. So now we're going to give it a little momentum, let the machine do the work again.
All right, we're zeroed out. We're ready to mount.
So, we got our weights on, and now it's just a matter of putting them back on the vehicle and torquing them to manufacturer's.